Appalling rag. It had a square neck like that. The sleeves were all in one. It isn't the kind of thing any woman would wear sort of willingly. This bit here was either lace or torn. It wasn't the kind of thing that Pat would ever wear.
But in Kenya, Pat had injured her ankle, and in hospital she'd had to wear a rough cotton gown.
When I came back and called Shirley, the first thing she said was, "Whatever happened to you?" I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Well, I saw you in a peculiar gown." I said, "Yes, I've been in hospital." And she said, "I made a sketch of it." So I said, "Well, have you?" You see. So she said, "Will you make a sketch of it and see if we can compare notes?" And so I did. And when I went down to Shirley's, 3 or 4 days later, it was more or less identical. I don't know how she saw me, but I thought of her when I woke up. Obviously, she just picked me up.
Most cases of telepathy appear spontaneous, flashes of lightning out of the blue. But some people have deliberately attempted to establish telepathic connections, often over great distances. Perhaps the most optimistic experimenters of all attempted to transmit thoughts across the length and breadth of North America, from the icy wastes of the Arctic all the way to an apartment in New York City.
The man in New York was journalist Harold Sherman. Today he lives in Arkansas with his wife Martha. The results of his extraordinary experiment in telepathy are carefully preserved in their country cabin. In 1937, Sherman met a famous Arctic explorer, Sir Hubert Wilkins. Wilkins was preparing a new expedition. He'd been hired by the Russian government to search for a plane thought to have crashed near the North Pole.
Everything possible is being done to find our missing aviators.
Wilkins flew north in a consolidated flying boat. Both Wilkins and Sherman were believers in telepathy. They agreed to try a long-distance test. 3 nights a week at 11:30 New York time, Wilkins would go over the events of the day in his mind. 3,000 miles away, Sherman would try to pick up his thoughts.
Well, Catherine, we've gone 20 miles here, and we just passed that little church. So
Meanwhile, this man, Reg Iverson, was trying to keep in touch with Wilkins in the conventional way, by shortwave radio. "40 years on, he's come to reminisce with Sherman at his retirement retreat in the Ozark Mountains.
After all this time.
What's it been, about 400 years?
Iverson swore an affidavit which stated that his efforts to contact Wilkins had been constantly frustrated by poor reception. In fact, he'd got through only 13 times in 5 months, and attested that Sherman had received more information by telepathy than he had by radio. One night, Sherman even picked up a message meant for him.
He got an impression that Wilkins had an urgent message for me to cancel an order for a piece of radio equipment for one of the members of the crew, of the search flight crew. And the next day, when I went down to the office, why, there was this message here for me. Sure enough, canceling the order for a radio receiver for Holly Kenyon, who was the pilot for the search flight.
A leading parapsychologist, Dr. Gardner Murphy, checked Sherman's impressions against the log kept by Wilkins at his base, Aklavik in Alaska. One day, Wilkins saw a dead dog on the ice. It was one of the many details of the expedition Sherman says he noted on the day that it happened. Another was a fire which broke out in a white house.
get a definite fire impression as though a house burning. You can see it from your location on the ice. I first thought of fire near your tent. But this may also be true, but the impression persists. It's the White House burning, and quite a crowd gathered around, people running and hurrying toward the flames.
Whatever Wilkins did in far-off Aklavik, Sherman seemed to know. Even the minor discomforts of the expedition did not escape his inner eye.
I had a feeling that Wilkins and maybe members of his crew had bumped their heads on some object, I couldn't determine what. And I recorded, and these are the actual words. Sudden severe pain comes to me, right side of head. And Wilkins wrote me some weeks later, this day, I and members of my crew could not keep from bumping our heads rather severely on the low overhanging stovepipes which we'd installed in our shelter.
Sherman's notebooks contained dozens of these impressions, later confirmed by the expedition log. To Wilkins, the success of the telepathy experiment came as consolation, for the Russian plane, lost in the polar wastes, was never found. In 1930, in a book called Mental Radio, pioneer telepathy tester Mary Sinclair claimed she could reproduce drawings hidden in sealed envelopes. One target was a bird's nest. This is what she drew. Another a volcano. She was right again. But Mary Sinclair's experiments were unsupervised, and so failed to provide scientific proof. Dr. Joseph Banks Rhine was the first to put telepathy testing on a scientific basis. Volunteers in his laboratory at Duke University in North Carolina took part in thousands of card-guessing trials. Rhine designed a range of scientific apparatus, including special packs of Xena cards with distinctive symbols on them. By chance alone, one card in each pile should match the target. Rhine claimed some people, by scoring much higher, proved the existence of ESP. On the other side of the Atlantic, British researchers followed his lead. They too set up elaborate precautions. Experimenters were kept apart. A set of random numbers determined the target cards, and next door the receiver's guesses were carefully logged. But though they tried to be more scientific than their predecessors, these laboratory pioneers